Hey, buddies. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of More with Stumpo. If you're new here, thank you so much for taking the time out of your really busy schedule. If you're a continuing listener, again, I still thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Today's episode was a lot different for me. So I speak with actually the two, they have their own podcast called the Dear Chiefs Podcast. I highly recommend that you guys check it out. If you have a spouse, I highly recommend that you kind of point your spouse in that direction of listening to them because they are firefighter wives of 15 plus years. So they have a ton of experience of what it's like to be a solo parent. I believe that's the correct term that they use during the podcast of what it's like raising children with a firefighter being gone at work. Now, their schedule for their husband is actually a lot different. They do a lot longer tours than what normally around guys like us do around here. We do 24/48s. One of her husbands does a 48/96. And the other one, I still don't fully understand it, but it seems that he works for 3 days on and then has a few days off and then goes back and can actually work longer days than that. So it's really interesting. They have a lot of insight of how to get a good schedule with a firefighter, how to set boundaries and emotionally, physically. It's a very interesting podcast, a very interesting episode. I highly recommend it. Again, check out their podcast. It's called Dear Chiefs Podcast. And I hope you guys really enjoy this episode. All right, ladies, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me on my podcast. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules and also waking up so early just to come on to mine since there's a 3-hour difference. So both of you, if you could introduce yourselves to the audience that are listening here, I would really appreciate that.
Well, good morning. I'm Audra. I am one of the co-hosts of Dear Chiefs podcast.
And I'm Chelsea, and I'm the other co-host of Dear Chiefs podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry. Both of our husbands work for different fire departments in California. So my husband's a municipal and Chelsea's husband works for, should we say the state?
Yeah, the state.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Well, I was actually just asked that, where do your husbands work at? So, thank you again so much. This has actually been a topic for me that I've been wanting to hit on for a while, to kind of speak to the fire wives to kind of understand what it's like emotionally for them and what it's like being alone at the house while their husbands are at work. Obviously having, a horrible time because they're missing you ladies so much. So that's what we're going to go with. So,
oh gosh, you're funny, Matt.
oh,
wow.
Oh, you didn't catch the part where you were laughing, at least. So now it sounds like I'm a total loser. But yeah, so with them being gone, so obviously a quick story about me for the people who do know me, who are personally friends with me. You do know that I went through a divorce last year, and something that's been in my mind the last few months is what was going on emotionally for my ex, what was going on for the guys' wives. Now, you guys have a fantastic podcast. It is called the Dear Chiefs Podcast. And where is that found?
Oh, you can find it anywhere.
Find any listening app.
Okay, perfect. So, so anybody who's listening here now, I'd go follow them. They're on Instagram as well. The Firewives Podcast on Instagram. Is that what it is?
No, it's podcast.
Okay. Well, why does it keep popping up on my phone as Firewives? So, anyways,
it's in our heading, maybe. Like it says Firewife Podcast underneath.
Yeah.
I don't know. Now I gotta look.
So
yeah. So underneath it says Firewife Podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and dive into, why did you guys start your own podcast?
So fun fact about us, Chelsea and I actually met on Instagram prior to the pandemic. So we had been talking back and forth, and then we kind of both felt like there was a need for us as wives of first responders to tell our story, and there wasn't a lot of good podcasts we could find that were dedicated specifically to the families and the spouses of firefighters. So we just said, screw it and started the podcast during the pandemic. And it's been wildly successful. And it just goes to show that there was indeed a huge need for our side of the story.
And I might add that we talked about doing a podcast, and Audra's like, "Can you record tomorrow?" It wasn't like
yes
planned at all.
So I'm the type of person that, like, when you say yes, I'm like, let's go, like full throttle. Let's just do it. And I just ripped the Band-Aid and go. And Chelsi was like, okay, sure, let's just do it. And it's been actually amazing. So was it last year or the year before? I was talking to Damien about this the other day. Did we meet last year or the year before in person?
Last year.
I can't even remember. It's so bad because the years are all blended together. But so we actually finally met in person. And well, that was really the only one time we've met in person, but we pretty much talk every single week. And we're always talking online and via text message. So we've just developed this really good relationship, and it's worked out really great.
Well, I'm excited to finally have you ladies on. So with you guys being the fire wives, there is stuff that when I talk with the guys at work that always comes up is dealing with the stress of having to break bad news to your wife or your girlfriend, whoever you live with. What has been a way that you ladies have noticed when you notice that your fireman is dealing with a lot of stress from work? What has been something that you thought to yourself, this is how I should go about it? Or how does he need to go about dealing with this type of anxiety or stress?
That's kind of a loaded question because we have a podcast. We talk about this every single episode. So.
I know. That's what I want you to kind of throw out, because you guys do so much on your podcast. You guys throw
out. So I think when we were new firewives, we were probably just as stressed out as they were, right? Like they were coming home stressed. It was stressing us out. We didn't really know how to deal with it. But both of us have been married to our guys now for 15 years, and we've kind of developed a way of getting them to stop being stressed when they get home. So I don't know how you want us to answer this question. Do you want us to answer this question as new firewives or as seasoned, salty old firewives?
Salty, young firewives.
Salty. No, we really are salty old firewives.
We are. We're pretty cranky now, I think.
I think we are so jaded. Okay. So I would say Audra and I both have a routine that we have with our firefighter. Audra's situation is a little different than mine, so I'm going to speak to the long absences because my husband gets forced on duty for endless days. So, and he sees a lot of big fires, big campaign fires, a lot of, in the most recent years, a lot of death. And it's been tough. So, one of the first things I would say is that you need to establish a coming home routine. So if they've been gone for a long time, we need to reconnect as spouses. And if we have children, we need to do that before we reconnect with our children. We need to get in a quiet space, go for a walk, have a cup of coffee, just kind of spend 30, 40 minutes just kind of getting acquainted with each other again. Because even after 4 days, that person's gone through so much that you don't even know about. And so have we at home. So it's, first of all, communicate always, but make sure it's in a safe space. When they're coming home, it's not the time to be like giving them the rundown of all the things that have happened to you in the last week and all the things we need to do right now. It's a time for them to come home and kind of just be. Secondly, they need to rest. So handing them a honey-do list on their first day off is not the way to go about things. Give them, half a day to chill. If they need to sleep, let them sleep. And then maybe the next day you can kind of introduce a honeydew list. um, but remember that they've been working like nonstop. I don't know how it is for Audra, but like when Cameron was on an engine, he isn't now. But when he's on an engine, I mean, they'd run calls all night long, all day long. There was no real downtime for them. So yeah, that would be my thing is communicate in a safe space, talk about your day, talk about your week, and let them rest before you hand them the to-do list. And don't check out. Like, don't just hand them the kids and leave. Like, I know that a lot of like younger wives do that, and I'm guilty. I did it too, and I'm sure Audra's shaking her head yes.
Mhm.
Because we ultimately want to break. We've been with the kids 3, 4, 10, 20 days, and we just want to like go to the spa or take a walk by ourselves, or yeah, even take a shower without children like with us. But when they first get home, it's not the time to like hand the kids to them and be like, come out. So that would be
Yeah.
one thing. I don't think I've ever like thought to myself, well, how can I make him stop be stressing out? I think more I feed off of his stress. If we don't have that, I'm gonna come home and have that cup of coffee, have some breakfast, just chill, and leave an open space for him to just kind of like talk. But also now that we're older, like we've established that like we talk every day. So he calls me when it's downtime and we, have a 30, 40-minute conversation, sometimes longer if we can, every single day. So we're not really doing that catch up thing so much anymore, but I know that like that's not practical for everyone. So
Yeah. I would say I pretty much agree with everything Chelsi said. It's a little bit different for us because my husband's municipal. So it depends on what station he's at. And if he's at the busy station, and I know he's been going nonstop for 2 days, 3 days, maybe 4 days, depending on overtime. Now I'm like, guys, dad's gonna come home and be tired and cranky. Let's give him some space. Like, very upfront with the kids. Like, dad had a really bad night. Let's give him some slack. Let him decompress before we start bombarding him with stuff. The good thing is now that the kids are older, they're not usually home when he gets home. If it's a weekday, they're at school. So he has a lot of time to come down and kind of get his bearings before the kids get home. And he is far enough away where he's got, an hour commute. So he's not decompressing, but at least getting a little bit in a calmer space on his way home. And I think Cameron had that too. Chelsea's husband had that too because he had quite a commute. Used to have
he
quite a
still
commute. So
does 2.5 hours.
is it still 2.5 hours? Oh my God.
Better than 5.
Yeah. So I think, hindsight is always an interesting thing. And I just posted about this today. Our routine was always so off when the kids were little. And I was just pissed off probably 24/7 for probably like 5 years. And I think during that time, it was because I was so fixated on my stuff and making sure the kids were, doing this. And he would come home and just blow up our whole routine. And I couldn't figure out how to fit him in to our life. And I wasn't even giving him the opportunity to come home and fit into our life. I was like, either you figure it out or I can't help you. Instead of me going, wait a minute, dad's been gone for 2 days. This is probably really hard for him to come back in here and integrate back into our lives. I was not in the space to even care. I was way in my own head. And looking back, I mean, our marriage is not perfect. And there were definitely times 5 years ago, even 6 years ago, when I was so wrapped up in my own shit, I was not paying attention to what was going on with him. And it caused a lot of problems in our marriage. And not saying that you have to be 100% involved in your spouse and not care about anything else, but you have to at least have some space and opportunity for your marriage and your life with your husband. It can't just be solely focused on your kids 24/7. It's not possible, and it's going to create a huge, huge issue.
And
So,
I would add that you also have to have personal goals and shared goals.
yep.
I think that that's the key to happiness at home and at work, is that he's got his stuff that he's going on at work. He's trying to get promoted. He's trying to like just make it through the day. He's, got all these responsibilities. He's got paperwork to do, all this stuff. And at home, we have similar things going on too. And the goal could just be to make it through the day.
Mhm.
But you have to have a personal goal, because if you're not doing something to fulfill yourself, there's no way that person's going to fulfill you at all. And then you have to communicate what those goals are. So you have your personal goals, and then you have your shared goals as a family. One of our goals every year is to make sure we get a vacation, like take the time, get the kids to the beach on his days off and go surfing and just be a family. And whatever those shared goals are, we have to be talking about them. So, and checking in and saying, how can I help you get to the goal that you've got set for yourself? And making sure that we support whatever that is.
Yeah.
So this is a realm of which for me is so outside of my comfort zone with the wife side. Obviously, because it's something that I normally don't talk with the wives and asking them like, so what is it that you deal with at home? But the question that has kind of been brought up in my head is, do you feel like a single mother at a lot of times, or in the beginning?
I never said single mom. I said solo parenting, because I'm not a single mom. I have a spouse. So I can't ever say that I identify as a single mother, because I don't know what that's like. I've always been married. So I just occasionally solo parent, and sometimes I solo parent more than I would like. But there's plenty of times when my husband has also solo parented when I have not been around. So, not a single mom. And I would hope that parents understand that there's a huge difference between being a single parent and solo parenting, because it's completely different.
It is completely different. I actually was a single mom before I met my husband, so I can speak to that honestly in Raleigh. Single parenting is the toughest thing a person can possibly ever do, and I have major amount of respect for women who do it every single day. So I would never call myself a single parent in that regard. We do spend a lot of time parenting our children apart. I would call it parenting apart. And probably up until about 3 years ago, I did feel like I was alone a lot of the time. And I took that on my spouse, which was completely unfair. I think we were, like Audra said, we get so wrapped up in our feelings and all the things that we have going on and the things we're doing for the kids and the things the kids have to do. And we forget that they're missing out. They're missing out. And it's not fair for us to put that on them. Our stresses at home are not their stresses at work, and vice versa. And so if we want them to not bring their shit home, we can't give our home shit to them. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
and so calling yourself a single parent is not fair, because
Yep.
you're not. There's another person who, love those children just as much as you do and miss them every single day that they're at work and want to be here and don't want to be missing the things. And so, no, we're not single parents. We don't feel like single parents. We're parenting apart, or we're solo parenting today. But I can call my spouse and be like, dude, this just happened and I need your help. And he may not be able to be here, but he can make a phone call, or he'll be like, let's table that discussion until I get home, or whatever needs to happen. And if it's an emergency situation, he'll come home. Like that's happened so many times with us in the last couple of years. Having teenagers is tough, man. Serious shit blow up in our house in the last couple of years. And I think Audra's had some similar situations like we have. And so I'm thankful that I have a spouse and that I'm not single parenting. So
Yes.
I'll get off my soapbox now, but that was a really loaded question.
But we agree. Yeah. No, we're not single parents.
So with your guys' relationships with your husbands, what is a healthy way of starting that conversation of communication with your husband and his career field on how, when you do come home, how are we going to go about this? Because you hit on it earlier, but just to start that conversation, how should the wives, if the wives want to start that conversation, if not, the men could, how could they do that?
I think that we've talked about this before. The best way to do that is to ask them how they want to be received at home and what would help them in the transition. Because I don't know what they need unless they tell me, right? And vice versa. So I think having that conversation really early on in the marriage would really be helpful for a lot of people. It would have been helpful for us for sure.
Yes.
If we had heard somebody say that like day one, that would have been really nice. But 15 years later, we're finally finally figured it out. But it's just asking, really, how, when you come home, what do you need or want your routine to be? And let them really tell you, because we're not the ones coming home, we're here.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, Chelsea, in the beginning, it was like, we just assumed you knew what to do and how to work your way back in. It's not true at all. Nobody is a mind reader. You have to ask questions. You have to be able to be vulnerable and say, I don't like the way this happened. Can we figure out how to make this better? How to get you, more comfortable when you walk through the door. So I'm not up your ass and you don't want to be here and you want to go back to work. We don't want that. So I think it's like Chelsi said, 100% communication. If somebody had said, hey, you might want to ask your husband how he feels about coming home, or vice versa. Maybe, hey, husband, you might want to ask your wife, like, what's the easiest way for you to integrate back into the house?
And I think also integrating out of the house, like, how do you want my last few hours in this house to be? Because they're not just coming home, they're also leaving. So what do I need to help you with before I go to work? I have to say, like, my husband is so attentive to this. Like, he stacks my firewood for me outside my door every time that he comes home. Before he leaves, he takes the garbage out. He does things that help me throughout the week so that I don't have to do them. And he's taught our children to help their parent, like, help your mom. I expect that you help your mom, not in a way of like that they are the men of the house necessarily or responsible, but help your mom out. If she asks you to do something, do it. If there's something that you can see she's struggling with, help her out. And, they're teenagers now, so they're better at it than they were when they were little, but there's always been this expectation that they help. And so I think ask your spouse how you want them to leave the house too. Like, because I guarantee you there are things that you are doing before you leave that annoy the crap out of your spouse and vice versa. So please, like, Cameron was forever leaving laundry for me to fold. Like, it happened for years and it just pissed me off to the point where it was like, you need to stop leaving me laundry. Like, this is not okay. And that's just one example of the thing. Like, he consciously tries very hard to like finish the laundry up before he leaves. But yeah, that would be, it's not always just about the transition home. It's also about the transition out of the house. I would also add that one of the best things that I've ever heard in my entire life for advice is be curiously compassionate. Be curious. If you have a question, ask. Don't assume that you can find the answer, because your spouse is the only one that can answer the question about themselves. So whatever you read on the internet may not be true. You know what I mean? Or, right?
What in retrospect are you speaking on? Because that's curiously compassionate. What would be an example for that?
So let's say, like Audra said, like, I know he's at a busy station today, and did you sleep last night?
Okay.
And are you tired? And what can I do to help? That's curiously compassionate, right? I know you're tired.
What could the spouses do to help understand the life of a firefighter?
I think it's impossible to understand, like, because we are not them, right? I think we only know what they share. And so we're always gonna have, you know, it really depends on who you're married to and how much they divulge and how much you as a spouse can take. So I know there's some spouses out there who do not want to know. I've gone through periods in our marriage when I've been like, you know what, I can't handle this. I don't want to know what happened. When he comes home and he's telling me about some crazy call and I'm knee deep in diapers or whatever, wherever I was at that time, and I just could not handle it. Um, and it's just one of those things where I only know what he tells me and his perspective because I'm married to him. I'm not married to the job like he is. So every firefighter's perspective is different. What they share with their family is going to be different. So it's impossible to say. Um, and it's impossible for any spouse, I think, to nail it down. Plus, it changes all the time, all the time. So I think you have to be in a space um, when, you marry a person, you have to be in a space to constantly change with them. If you're standing still, there's probably something wrong. Um, that's my philosophy, I think, because nothing is ever the same. You have to be open to constant change and go with the flow and just be okay with that. And that, again, like Chelsi and I keep saying, like, if we had known this 15 years ago, I would say we probably wouldn't have needed couples therapy. I mean, maybe we would have just for fun, but like there's a lot of
Everybody
stuff.
needs couples therapy, Audra. Everybody needs
actually
therapy.
really questions that I've got down. Real quick, I wanted to ask this, then I wanted to move on to couples therapy because that's exactly what I was going to say. Do you ever feel that your spouse puts the job in front of your marriage?
I think it's a give and a take. Yeah, I think they do, and I think they have to. I think that it would be dangerous if they didn't. And
yes.
I know that they have work family and then they have our family, and sometimes our family's priority and sometimes their other family is priority. And I used to resent that, like honestly, like used to resent that. But now I understand that in order for them to be able to do their job and be safe, their other family has to take priority sometimes. Yep. Never, ever should they take priority out. Our family should come first, absolutely, all the time, but it's a give and take situation. The job does have to come first at some point. When they're at work, absolutely, like they can't be worrying about what's going on at home. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of business. But yeah, I think that it's all the time, like all the time is taking priority, and it should be.
Yeah. I think when they're at home, we have really good boundaries in place where, they still can, obviously you're a firefighter 100% all the time, right? There's no magic switch to turn it off when they're at home. But if you put good boundaries in place, like, hey, okay, I'm going to give you an hour to tell me about whatever you want to tell me about work. And then let's not talk about it for the rest of the day. But he also gives me the same courtesy where he's like, what do you need to tell me? Let's talk about it freely. And then let's not, or if we need to table it and talk about it later, we'll do that. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's important for him to also shut it off when he needs to. So, if we give him that space where we're like, okay, give us everything and then let's stop and let's return to dad mode or whatever the case may be,
I think that, like, somebody said to us once that you can't leave home at home and you can't leave work at work. So you're one person, you're not two people, you can't split yourself in half. And so, yeah, your priorities are going to change based on where you are. That being said, we also have like a very strict, like no phone calls or texts from work while we're on dates or while we're spending time as a family. The phone gets shut off or put on silent mode or whatever, so that we're not interrupting family time.
Yep.
And I think that's like really, really important because I mean, our husbands are captains, so like they could be being interrupted all day long if they let their people interrupt them. And it's just going to get worse as they promote up through rank. So, you know, we've already had those conversations. Like once you promote, like there's going to have to be certain hours where you're not going to be constantly on your phone, like talking to people at work. Like that's just, there's going to have to be some serious boundaries. So yeah,
So
I
what
think
I'll
that was more of a question, an answer than you wanted.
so in case you were saying like stay off your phone, Matt, like I'm taking notes. I'm asking.
Taking notes
what
is
I was-
okay. Okay.
Well, I always feel bad when I'm doing this because I'll be staring down at my phone, like typing up extra questions. A lot of the stuff's just off the top of my head because it's what I'm generally interested in. You mentioned something about when he doesn't shut off, and that gets in my head that I remember that I had an experience that it hasn't bothered me as much lately, but it bothered me for a while. And I don't have. If you guys don't mind if I share a little bit of it, it was an 18-year-old that got crushed, and I was the ride out officer that day. He was working at Aldi's warehouse, which I don't know if you guys have Aldi's out in California. Aldi's is a yeah, it's a cheaper store to go to, market to go get food and stuff like that. It's a lot cheaper.
Okay.
So he was working at their warehouse, which is this giant warehouse we have in our district. And he's 18 years old. He was cutting boundaries inside of their protocols. So he was not following their OSHA requirements, or OSHA. Whatever. So he hit the ramp button for it to come down to load up a trailer and snuck around the back of it to go open up the trailer door on the semi truck trailer. It had a load in it. All the load was pushed to the back and he couldn't open it. So he turns around and the ramp comes down slowly on him and just suffocated him all the way down. Well, I had to make the call whether to try to work him or not. And seeing he's 18 years old, his life is just, he's fresh at life, just got the opportunity to become a young man, and he died a slow, painful death. I come home to tell this to my ex-wife, my wife at the point. She had no idea what to do, no idea how to handle me as the because I'm not by any means a small person. So compared to her, I am a giant compared to her. And she doesn't understand how to deal with this giant person coming to her saying, I am hurting. I need to talk to you. I need a motherly figure right now to hold me and let me cry in your lap or let me cry in your shoulders. She just didn't know how to handle it. How would you help other firewives with how to handle something like that? What is it they can do to prepare?
First of all, I don't think there's any preparation for it because I don't know. Well, I shouldn't say that. I take that back. I would say, well, first of all, being where I am now, Chelsea's gonna laugh probably. I would say, did you go to any kind of debriefing after that call?
Wait, though, because sometimes the debriefings don't happen right away, so that's not a fair question.
No. So what had happened was I have a great relationship. Our firemen have a good relationship with the cops in that area. And my dog, which Delilah, you got to meet her in the beginning. Her name's Delilah. It's my sweet Delilah. She's my best friend. And this is what the whole
So
time.
cute.
She's a pity. My ex-wife, I didn't tell her what happened. I just told her, bring Delilah here to the firehouse. And she brought the dog to the firehouse. She cuddled with everybody. She's a big cuddler. And then one of the cops showed up and just said, does anyone want to talk? And how we handled that stress was cracking jokes and being tough in front of each other. We were a very young crew that day. Did I have an EAP program which is an employee assistance program? No. My battalion chief did come down and talk to us. about it. But what I will say and what I will admit, because I've been through a couple of experiences like that, when there's only certain people some people might want to talk to, and it might not want to be that program. It might be my best friend who is not in the fire service. I called him. I've called him plenty of times, and I've cried on the phone. I've cried in it, like I've just gave him a big hug and cried on him and just telling him what I've just went through. He has no idea what I do. I mean, he has no idea what it's like to be a fireman, but he's just somebody who I can be vulnerable to. And I couldn't do it to my ex-wife because of how she reacted. And then that also in return made a little bit of a like butting heads a little bit when I need someone to be there for me, and I've been there for you and you won't do it for me. And I feel like I'm not the only one that deals with that. There's no way I can be, because if I have to deal with it, I'm not the very first person in the world to deal with it. So then my question on that is, how can guys recognize if they're in a, not a toxic relationship, but with somebody who just doesn't understand?
I think the first thing that you need to know is how much your spouse can handle. So, and I think being there for someone isn't necessarily having to listen to what just happened. It's more just sitting in silence and letting them have their moment. And sometimes those moments are many. So number one, like, you have to ask your spouse how much they can handle and how much they want to know. Because it's not fair to put something on someone that's going to emotionally stress them out either. And that's not going to be good for you or them or anybody else. Secondly, how do you know if you're in a toxic relationship? I think we all know if we're in a toxic relationship. I think we know deep down that, like, this is not working out. This person obviously does not want to be here for me, and I don't want to be there for them, and I don't want to be around it. So that's really personal. I would say if you have more bad days than good days, that's a toxic relationship. Period.
I would say that's correct. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you cannot communicate without ripping each other's heads off, you need to go to therapy. And then you can let the therapist tell you if you're in a toxic relationship and whether it's going to work or not. You can come to a mutual agreement about that. Because I know that there's been plenty of times when we've gone to therapy because we couldn't work our own shit out, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's necessary. And I would advocate for just going to therapy because just to communicate, like,
as a communication tool. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a communication tool to get it to know it. It's always nice to have that little mediator in there, like, every once in a while. So, but I want to go back to the previous question because Audra was in the middle of answering it. I'm like, wait, but that's not a fair question. Debriefing. How can you prepare for those moments?
Yeah.
Educating yourself. There's a plethora of information out there on mental health, and our podcast included. Educate yourself on the signs of PTSD and how to deal with them and who to call and what to do in those situations. Because even if you can't handle what they're about to tell you, you can at the very least know who to call so that somebody can listen to their story. And if they're in a really bad spot, that can help them completely through it. I don't know, Audra, do you have anything else to add? And compassionate curiosity.
Yeah. So I think, like you said, so when you were vulnerable with your wife, was she like that every time you came to her and were vulnerable? I'm curious. Or was it just ex-wife?
Yeah, there was there's just the ex-wife on that part.
Sorry, added that.
But yeah, so it was every time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't know if there was something wrong with me. And that's what the issue was. And I was constantly going back, and I would sit there and talk with the guys at work about a lot of stuff, but there's only so much that you'd want to say, you know, because me being on the opposite side of this, I'm sure your husbands have explained this to you at some point in your marriages. But for me, you know, I'm not, you know, in that type of a relationship anymore. And I would say to the guys like, hey, is this normal? And then I'd hear a lot of this. I'd hear this from them. yeah, my wife doesn't want to listen to it, or she doesn't understand. I can't do it. It's not, I don't believe that it's 100% the wife's fault. I believe it's both on that end because it's communication on both sides. But it just comes down to, does the person care, in my head. And at the time, I just didn't think she really cared. But I'm past that point now. So if I do want to know, what is something with your guys' education on speaking with people, speaking to people on your podcast about depression and anxiety and stress? What are some of the signs that the wives should be looking for or can recognize that, he shouldn't be talking to me? He needs to talk to a therapist. He needs to talk to somebody more professionally acquired for this.
Okay, so first of
So many
all,
things.
I've been through this personally, so, and I don't know how, I'm sure Audra has too.
Yes.
One of the things that I've noticed when they do have a rough call and they need to go talk to someone is that they isolate. And whether that be isolation through playing video games or isolation through checking out of the house, or, they just check out, completely check out. Where for us, like, my husband's pretty involved with our kids. Like, they're doing wood projects, they're going surfing, they're doing things all the time together. When he stops interacting with my children, that's a problem. And so I would say isolation, drinking too much, doing drugs, being kind of sad and mopey all the time, being like saying negative self-talk, maybe outbursts of anger that are not normal for them, being impatient, not sleeping. These are all signs, and it doesn't have to be like one or the other. It can be many of these things going on. But for me personally, it's isolation and checking out. Yeah, I don't know, Audra.
Yeah. I would say when there were some rough incidents, and I didn't know how to handle it on some really severe calls. And there's one that my husband still talks about, that I think, years later still bothers him. It was just a horrible, horrible incident, and they got debriefing afterwards. But for a long time, like similar to your call, he could not get it out of his head. And it got to the point where you could tell he was not sleeping. He was almost combative anytime you talk to him about the simplest things. And just the pendulum of mood was just like constant. And you never knew what person you were going to get when they came home. And when they were at home for 4 days, you just didn't know. And it got to the point where I didn't know what to do. And it was severely affecting our relationship and his relationship with the kids. And I said, okay, this is beyond both of our control. This is beyond both of our capacity. You need to talk to somebody. And that's where, thank God, he found a culturally competent therapist, and she was a freaking lifesaver. Literally. And he actually, it was really cool. He is now doing some peer counseling of his own. So he's been taking some classes, and the last class that he took, his counselor was actually there on the speaking panel, and he hasn't seen her in a few years. And he was so excited that he got to see her again and thank her for literally teaching him how to cope and deal with traumatic events, because he could not figure it out on his own, and I couldn't either. So sometimes it doesn't matter how many articles you read, how many podcasts you listen to, all of those things. You need somebody sitting in front of you saying, okay, this is how your brain works. This is what you need to do to turn it off.
Well, and I would add to that, like, even if you know those things, because Cameron knows those things. He is a peer counselor. even if you
Yeah.
know these things, it doesn't really matter. Like,
Well, sometimes you can't
going through
recognize it.
trauma, you're going through
Mhm.
trauma. Like, there's
Mhm.
no, you can just throw the handbook out. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. So, I think it's, it goes both ways. You really have to be keyed in to your spouse. And just like we're moms, right? Chelsi and I are moms. So we're naturally keyed into our kids' feelings and emotions pretty much 24/7. Like you can look at them and go, oh, they're pissed off about something. It's the same thing with your husband, right? You have to be so keyed into your spouse that you can look at them and go, uh-oh, something's gonna happen in a minute. Like, let's figure this out really quick before it explodes, right? It's the same concept. So it kind of baffles my mind that I never would have even thought of this 10 years ago, that like my husband also had feelings that were similar to the kids, and that like I also had to be paying attention to him and his feelings because he was paying attention to mine and he knew that I was, gonna explode. But I was like, he's fine. Like he gets his 2 days at work. He doesn't need me to think about him like that.
and
But he
that's the
did.
key right there. They're at work. So he
Mhm.
gets his time away
He
from the
gets his
kids,
time
right?
away.
That's
Exactly.
yep,
Mhm.
that's it right there.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
the key.
Yeah.
I've
So it's
actually heard wives say that too. Sorry to interrupt. I've actually heard
no.
excuse me. I've heard wives say that. Well, he gets his time away and I don't get mine. I'm always here with the kids. I work and I take care of the kids. And I think that starts in
Whose fault is that though? Like
and see,
that's my question to them. Whose fault is that? Why are you always with the kids? Why are you not taking time to yourself?
Yep.
Call a babysitter, phone a friend. Like, that's just a lack of self-care.
Yeah.
Pure,
I will
pure and
say,
simple, and that is not your
mhm,
spouse's fault. That is your fault.
well, some people, to be fair on their side, might not have the
yes.
ability to be able to do that. And I
Or
know my yeah, go ahead.
like we have many wives that my hour is my hour of self-care time and nothing disturbs it. So like the kids might have to like play a game by themselves or watch a TV show or do whatever they're going to do, but my hour of this day is happening regardless. It's reading a book, it's exercising. It doesn't have to be outside the home to be personal self-care time. And I would say if you're always with the kids and you're never getting time to yourself, that's still your fault. Like, there are ways to get away from your children in your house. I promise you. I have a friend who is a Navy wife and her husband's gone for 9 months out of the year. And I literally called her one day because my husband had been on shift for like 15, 16 days. And I was going absolutely berserk. It was a tough year. Um, and I called her and I was like, how do you deal this for 9 months at a time? And she's like, sometimes I lock myself in my room and I don't let the kids in. I give myself a timeout. And I think that was like the best piece of advice I was ever given. Like, give yourself a freaking timeout. Whose fault is it that you're not getting time to yourself? It's not your spouse's fault. It's not your kid's fault. It's your own fault.
Well, and I think there's a little bit more to be said about that. I think it's a societal issue too, is like women have been taught to think that they don't deserve their time out. And so this is us breaking that bullshit notion that you're not allowed to have your own time to yourself. That's just never needed to be true, ever.
Mm-mm.
Like the kids are going to be fine if you take an hour to yourself. Even if you can't leave and physically be away from them, mentally, you can escape them for an hour.
Guys, an hour is 2 episodes of Caillou.
Right? Bluey. Okay. We love Bluey. Like,
we love Bluey. We love Caillou. Okay. Enough said.
But he is a whiny little kid. That kid, I went back and watched it with my nephews, and I was like, "Oh my god, this kid will not stop bitching." He got shoved at a playground and got down and cried. Like, come on, dude.
yeah,
Like,
Caillou's a little wuss. Yeah.
He's a little wuss, but the kids love him. So as far as
Yeah.
I'm concerned, that's 2 episodes of their favorite little cartoon. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So Matt, you don't have kids.
No, I got a.
Okay.
Her name's Delilah. She's a furry daughter.
Oh well, yeah. Okay. Furry pets, they count
Yeah.
as
I have 4 furry pets in my house right now, and I literally had to lock 3 of them outside. Like, come on.
I tell you what, my dog has been. Let me shut this light off because it is way too much, and then I'll come right back.
I look like I'm like in a halo over here, so we're fine.
Oh, since we're not going to be posting the video of it, so now I look like a normal person.
There you go.
The biggest thing for me is when I was going through a lot of my experiences, my dog was there for me. And I noticed that if I was just around her, that's all I needed, because she didn't say anything, and she'd come up next to me, she'd sit down, she'd snort a little bit because she's a pity. She just snorts, and then she'd just look at me and look right in my eyes, and I knew things are going to be okay. It was weird. It was kind of like my little like you have your little stress blankets or your weighted blankets and stuff like that, to where you know things are going to be fine. And I didn't have to have someone stand there and tell me that it's going to be okay. So for me, that's what I really really related with, and I count on her for a lot of that stuff. And before, for me to be able to deal with a lot of stress was to just start educating myself on something and getting my mind off of that topic, whatever that topic was. And typically that topic was a call that we would have gone on at work, and something just kind of stuck with me. But I did notice, and I did talk to actually Lieutenant Colonel Grossman about this. Was I went through one traumatic event, which was my divorce. But 4 days after she left, I had my very first pediatric cardiac arrest. And it didn't bother me, not one bit, the entire time. And it was weird because I remember sitting there. I remember, and I won't share too much of it, but I was doing compressions for a little bit. And then I switched over to do airway because of the positioning that we had. And I'm just sitting there doing it. I'm just looking at her, and she's a beautiful little baby. And I'm just staring at her. And I'm like, this ain't bad. This ain't real. Like, it's not happening. My best friend's gone. And I just, the experience of my best friend choosing to leave me superseded that moment emotionally for me. And when I talked with him about that, and he had a name for it, I don't remember the name for it because I'm not a psychologist or anything, but it was talking about traumatic experiences when they're binding up on each other, whichever the worst one's going to take precedent, and everything else doesn't feel like it's a problem at all. And then that got me thinking, the more I think about it, is how often does that happen? Because at some point, that's going to have to come back up. At some point. It hasn't yet. Will it come back? I don't know. I've held a couple babies since. Hasn't really popped up in my head yet. But at some point, that's going to have to come back up, and I'm going to have to face that. But then I get to thinking, like, well, how do the wives deal with stuff like this? How do they? I know that you said earlier setting boundaries, but is there at any point where there's going to be a time where you're going to have to listen to anything? Or do you just say, this is something that I can't handle, or I don't need to know this part of the story, but you need to talk to an actual therapist? Is that something that you've thought about or had to deal with? Either of you.
I personally haven't dealt with that because I'm a pretty resilient person. I telling stories isn't gonna really bother me. Like, him telling me what happened at work is not, maybe it'll be sad and I'll have empathy for it, but it's not something I can't handle. If it were my own children, like something were happening to them, absolutely, I would have probably just lose it. But I think part of like being married is shared experience. So why would I not want to listen to him? And, you know, there is a certain point at which I cannot help him. And so I would say, I cannot help you. You need to go find some help. Or I think it would be beneficial if you talk to someone about this to help you work through it. But I've never experienced like not wanting to listen to his story ever. He's
Yeah,
experienced not wanting to tell it. And
yeah.
there was a lot of that going on for a long time. And I think once he started to tell his stories, that's when our marriage actually like worked.
Yeah. I will say, there's been some times when I have cringed so bad, with my husband telling me a story. But it's not like I don't think I've ever been in the space where I've been like, oh my God, stop. There's for sure been times when he started to tell me a story and I'd be like, you know what, right now, I don't know if I can handle this. Can we come back to it later? Or if you need to talk about it right now, um, I might not fully be present. I don't know. The only ones that he has a hard time talking about are pediatric calls. Um, and I think just because, well, a lot, he's better now, but when the kids were little and he would have pediatric calls, those would be the worst. And he would call me from work after those calls and ask to talk to the kids. Because I think that just kind of checked him back into like, okay, my kids are okay. This experience sucked, but I know my kids are okay. And it helped him feel better about the situation. So um, there's definitely, I mean, and there's been plenty of calls when I'm just like, oh my God, like, but I've also literally I've been there when he has had to do like, I'll tell you a really quick story. Chelsea, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, and I think I've shared this before. So a year ago, we were driving down the 2-lane highway, and there was an accident right in front of us, a motorcyclist, and he was off duty. Obviously, we had all the kids in the car, um, and it was raining. Long story short, motorcyclist and his daughter was on the back of the motorcycle. He ran head on into a truck, 2 cars in front of us, and we pulled over to the side. My husband got out because when you're in firefighter mode, doesn't matter if you have your gear or not. He ended up helping the patient and the daughter, and he the patient lost his leg. My husband lost his belt because he used his belt as a tourniquet. It was complete chaos right in front of me. And I was telling my kids to close their eyes, not look, like I didn't want them to see, what was going on. Um, and I watched my husband walk back to our car completely glossy-eyed, like I had never seen him. And we've been married for 20 years. So I've seen him in all kinds of predicaments. And that was really the first time when I registered, like, holy shit, he does this every day. And like watching him walk back to the car, sit in the car, and him kind of process what just happened, and him go, first thing he says is, I need a new belt. And I'm like, why? What happened to your belt? And he's like, I had to use it as a tourniquet. This guy lost his leg. And I'm like, what the, like, this all happened right in front of us. And it was literally the first time I was like, oh my God, like this is the kind of shit that he sees every single day. And it never really occurred to me before how much you have to process this stuff every day, right? And how it compounds on you over time. So um it really kind of changes your perspective, I think, when you actually are kind of watching your husband at work, even though he wasn't really at work. So it gives you a lot more room for empathy and sympathy and understanding and compassion because you see it in real life. So I think there's like something to be said about the spouses who kind of are easy to disassociate from that because they have never seen it and they have never experienced it, right? Um, Not saying go on a ride along with your spouse if you can't handle it. I don't think that's a good idea. Like, but if you really want to understand like a little bit more what your spouse deals with on a daily basis at work, maybe do go on a ride along. I mean, there's been times when we've been up at the station having dinner or lunch and the tones go off and they get up and go and you still hear on the radio that your firefighter is now in a burning building and you're sitting at the station eating lunch. and just listening, it gives you a different perspective. And it makes you, I think, it forces you to pay attention a little bit more to your husband. Um, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, that's I think that's why I don't the calls don't bother me when he comes home and wants to talk about it. Because
But also, Audra, turn off the scanner.
And I will say, Chelsi is very good about getting me to turn off the freaking scanner when he's on a fire, when there's anything major. I don't have any, like, my pulse point does not go off at all anymore. Not even in,
oh, sorry.
no, not even in the city. If there's sirens going by, I'm like, okay, great. I'm going on with my life.
A woman named Frosty, and her husband was on my podcast. Terrific episode. His name's Steve Doman. He's passed away recently. One of my best friends. But when I spoke with Frosty about it, Steve was at one of the busiest firehouses in Indianapolis, and he was in it from the 70s or 60s all the way up until the early 2000s. It's a ton of experience. Actually, over half the stuff in this room is actually from him. But Frosty would say that she used to listen to the scanner, and she finally had to turn it off when she heard that a firefighter went down and he ended up passing away. And it was actually part of the crew that one of the fires that Steve was on, and she just thought it was him for sure. And he's had a few of his times where he had to go to the hospital and transported, and she'd hear it over the radio or the scanner when they're saying they're transporting a firefighter to the hospital. And she said, I just had to stop. I had to stop listening to it. And that kind of just makes it, because I think now with the guys that I'm friends with, that I work with, and their wives, and are they worried when they go to shift? Is it just another one of the days where, because obviously a fire could happen at any point. Do we get a lot of fires at Greenwood? No, but it doesn't say that it won't happen at some point. I wanted to ask you ladies about a question for the single guys out there that are going to be going in towards the relationship status with a woman, or whichever their preference is. But what is something that they're going to need to look for in a spouse? Because obviously I missed the red flags, obviously. But what's going to be something that they're going to have to look for a suitable spouse that's going to be a firewife, or for the women, for their husbands?
That is a loaded question again, Matt. I swear. I mean, because I'll tell you, I'm not the person I was 20 years ago when I married my guy, and he wasn't even a firefighter when we got married. He wasn't even a paramedic when we got married. So what advice would I give somebody looking for a spouse, that first responder looking for a spouse? Well, I mean, for me personally, I am very well, I've always been very comfortable being by myself. And there are so many moments when I'm still by myself, and I'm completely okay with that. So I think the number one thing is to make sure that the person that you're with is very comfortable being alone, because you spend a lot of time by yourself. And I think you have to be very compassionate when it comes to, I mean, just in general though, like that's just for anybody, I think. And you have to be communicative, because it's important. But I don't know. It's such I mean, the question varies so much. It really depends on the person. But I think the number one thing for me is, honestly, you have to make sure people are okay with being by themselves, because I think that's one of the biggest issues probably in first responder world, is that the spouses don't know what to do when they're by themselves. I don't know. What do you think, Chelsea?
I would add, you said compassionate, but I would say selfless, because honestly, like if you're marrying a selfish person, like if you know right away that they're like not going to be able to put other people before themselves, like that's a no-brainer. Like, you're obviously a selfless person if you're a first responder. You're always putting other people first, and there are going to be times when your spouse has to let you do that, and if they're selfish, they won't be able to. And so I would add to, independent, selfless, compassionate. Those are the three main things I would say you're looking for.
And as easy, I mean, try to be easygoing. Like, it's not, you're going to go through phases where you're not easygoing. But I think, for the most part, you have to be pretty, go with the flow in this kind of chaos, because it's just, you can't be so rigid. It's just not possible. I mean, I'm a very rigid person by nature, so it doesn't always work for me. And I've had to really, really let go of a lot of stuff. And it's been extremely helpful. And like, be willing to change, because like I said before, there's nothing consistent about this line of work. It changes every day. You never know what you're going to get. And just be comfortable with change, and cross your fingers. I don't know.
What's the most rewarding thing about being married to a fireman?
Rewarding?
There none. Absolutely none. It's shit. It's the worst thing I've ever done.
I think the most rewarding thing is we get to have that selfless person, because they do anything for us.
Yeah.
They'll do anything for people they hardly know. Imagine what they'll do for us.
Yeah.
People that they love.
Yeah. That's a good one. I mean, and to be honest with you, full transparency, the reward is, the vacations are very nice. Like, the 10-day vacation is great. Like,
Oh, great.
I mean,
You're setting
when
the boundaries 10 days.
When you start really feeling sorry for yourself, just remember you get a paycheck and a vacation. Like,
right?
That's
seriously.
we call that the overtime dilemma. Like, we want them to have the overtime pay, but we don't want them to be gone. Like,
Mhm.
So you're talking about, Audra, I'm curious. It sounds like your husband does 4896s. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Be honest about that schedule. Do you like that schedule?
I mean, I've gotten used to it. He worked for Cal Fire for 2 years, so he worked 96/48, and that was absolute misery for me personally. But he only worked there for 2 years. I probably would have gotten used to it over time. But I absolutely hated the fire season. I mean, I still hate the fire season, but I've learned to adapt to it. So it doesn't bother me. 48 is like, and it never is 48, turns into 72, sometimes 96, like who knows. But it's all I've known for 15 years. So I don't even flinch really most of the time.
Chelsi?
I'm just thankful when he actually only has to work 72 hours. Like, like, if he actually gets his days off this week, it's a miracle. So, yeah.
Yeah.
My schedule is 24/48. So obviously 24 on, 48 off. So it's every third day. So it's what's the struggle for me was the first day I'd come back is kind of your decompressing. Like this morning I came off work, like I got off work this morning. I'm still exhausted. I'm still tired. Did I sleep most of the night last night? Yeah, we got up once last night, which is pretty good. But then operating the whole entire day, and then tomorrow morning, like I did sleep in till tomorrow morning, and then I prep tomorrow night to go to the shift the next morning. So it's constant. I only have about 14 hours really to myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know, because the talks of what I've been wanting to have with the guys is switching to a 4896. And that's going to be a discussion that the wives are going to have to be in on as well, to see what the pros and cons are, if they'd be able to want to swing that. I just didn't know if that's something that if your husband ever did a 24/48 or any other type of schedule, then switch to a 48/96 to see what he thought on it or what you think.
No, the year he came on was the year that they switched out of the Kelly schedule, which that's what we called it. It was like 24 on, 48 off, 24 on, 96 off. I don't know, it was something weird. I think there's only one station or one department that still does it like that in the state. But I would say, like you said, so the 48 hours is great because he's at work, whatever. When he comes off and he's actually off for 96, he has like that first day to kind of come home and decompress. And then he is actually present for 2 days. And then on the fourth day, he starts winding back up. We call it the Sunday scaries, not always on a Sunday, when he starts really winding up about what he's going to do, what training he's doing, who is he working with, who's making dinner, blah, 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 all those things. So I can see how 24/48 is not enough time to come home and actually decompress and be present, because it's being present is a huge thing, and that's not enough time to be actually present.
So I have a question about the 24/48. So do you work your 24/48 and then you do like two shifts and then you get like more
Another
days
3 days
off?
off?
Is it like a Kelly schedule?
Yeah.
There's no Kelly day. My department's different. We don't have a Kelly day. Instead, we just have overtime pay that's built into our 48 to 72.
Okay.
So, you know how firemen, they hate two things, right? They hate change and they hate the way things are right now. So the problem that I'm having with, and there's a few guys that are having this issue, is trying to build in something that's less stress. And a lot of our guys, my department, the last few years, we've had multiple suicides. We just had a police officer commit suicide recently. We had a firefighter last year commit suicide. I was friends with the guy, and then a couple years prior, we had a guy who committed about 10 years ago. We had a guy commit suicide 9 years ago, 10 years ago. Guy commit suicide, and then just a handful of years ago, another one of our guys committed suicide. And it has been something that the talks started to happen about mental health a little bit, and then our EAP program got started. In my eyes, I do not like our EAP program at all. I don't. And I'm very vocal about that kind of stuff. But I also give constructive criticism on it. We're a young department. We're becoming more of a young department. We're mostly a full-time department. But it's just, we're reluctant for change. And with the scientific studies about the lack of sleep, the interrupted REM sleep, with stress and depression and anxiety, is that we're realizing how much of an effectiveness this is in the fire service and first responders in general. Changing a shift schedule alone will help out reducing your risk of diabetes, cancer, stroke, heart attack, anxiety, depression. The list goes on just by having a little bit more sleep. It's just, guys just don't want to change that up, and getting the qualified people who do that schedule, which I've been looking for somebody who does that schedule. And I was actually about to contact some guy out of Las Vegas to ask him about that 48/96. So if you don't mind, if I talk to your husband about the 48/96, see what he thinks, that would be beneficial in what their department does.
Oh yeah.
Perfect. So,
Mm-hmm.
but that was something that
I mean, I don't know. I think the 72-hour shift is pretty awesome too. Like the state does it. So it's 3 days on, 4 days off, or 4 days on, 3 days off. And that 3 days off seems to be enough. So if they don't want to go 72, what is it? 96, 48.
48.
Yeah.
48/96, yeah.
48/96. So they work 48, they're off 96. Maybe the 72 would be a good compromise.
I think the 48/96 would be amazing. It's just because the studies with your recommended sleep schedules, because like I did do this with my ex-wife when I was married. I did highlighted bears. I don't know if you can see her. Come on, up. No, no, you don't want to jump. She's a good girl. But I know what I did with my ex-wife was when I came home, I was like, I need to sleep. Like, give me until noon for me to sleep, and then we can talk. Or I'd sleep in at work and then come home later. And that was something that sleep was an extremely important factor in how my day was going to go. And if I had a lack thereof it, then the day was not going to go well. But if I had a sufficient amount of sleep, the day was going to go pretty well. And Audra, do you have to get to your meeting? I set my time.
I've got about 5 minutes.
Perfect. What is it that you guys think that the fire service is heading towards in mental health? Do you see it going in a positive role or a negative role? Or is it kind
I
of
think
being straight line?
it's positive, but it's very slow. It's very slow. I think,
Like everything in the fire service.
yeah, they move at a snail's pace here. I mean, it's as like for departments like yours who have had suicides, and they don't have some kind of peer counseling or
You do now.
debriefing or okay, yeah. I mean, that should be like your number one priority right now. Is your guys' mental health and you know, it sounds like your schedule. Because I'd be curious to see the studies, which I'm sure they don't include this, in how their marriage is when they switch to a 4896. I'd be curious to see what the wives say, if it's better. And my thought would be that it would be better because they would be at home a little bit more. But um, on the mental health side, yeah, I think there's always room for improvement, and there's about miles of room for improvement in first responder world.
I
It's getting
think
better.
I
It's very
think
slow.
I think just in the last few years it's actually sped up a bit.
Yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of emphasis, at least in our state department, there's a lot of emphasis being put on mental health. Because they are realizing that all these campaign fires have taken their toll on our department in particularly. Um, and so I think the spotlight is on the mental health piece of firefighting. That being said, it's not enough. And
yeah,
we can definitely do better.
Is that
absolutely.
is that mental health is always going to be that car that we're chasing that we're just not fast enough to grab?
I think so. And I think because for two reasons. Number one, because there's not enough culturally competent health professionals in the world to cover the vast majority of the topics. And number two, like you said, firefighters are afraid of change. So, we don't like change and we don't like what's happening right now. So those things combined we're always gonna be chasing down the car, like you said.
Awesome.
I think the good thing about the current influx we're in with like with my husband's department in particular, I don't know about yours, Chelsea, but the younger guys that are being hired are, it seems like for the most part, much more in tune with the fact that they do need mental health services and they don't want to be working 7,000 overtimes. I think they're taking themselves into account a lot more than they were before. That's my experience with my husband's department. The guys that are being hired on are, I don't want to say selfish, but they're definitely paying more attention to their wives, their families, themselves, more than I have seen in the guys that are retiring and out the
I
door.
honestly can't. I honestly can't speak to that in a current affairs state because my husband doesn't really work in a station anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's happening on station level. But what I can say is that because the emphasis is being put on mental health, it's cool to get help now. It's not like
Yeah.
it's not frowned upon anymore and it's top down. So every single person that goes through academy now with the State Department has to go through resiliency training. So it's not like it used to be, where it was never talked about. I think we talked to a professional who it was like they went through a training and it was like one slide for mental health, like resilience training, like one entire slide. That's not the case anymore. It's an entire like week now. So
Yeah.
And it's with Susan Farron and her team. So I mean, you can't get better than that, can you?
We love Susan.
Oh yeah, we'll shoot you
we'll introduce you to Susan.
Yeah, we'll introduce you to Susan. She's really
I would love that. But I think there's a healthy balance, and I do know that you have to keep going. I'll make this final comment, then we can open up to what you guys want to say for the end. There's a healthy balance between being so openly to mental health and awareness of it, and abiding to everyone's emotions. But it also, I think, can hurt a lot of things as well, because if I baby, here's how I think about it. My parents live in the city that I serve, right? Oh man, the camera. It doesn't really matter because we're not recording on it. My parents live in the city that I serve. If we're babying every single person on the entire department over a course of 15, 20 years, we're not going to have a whole lot of tough people, mentally tough people. Now, maybe I'm wrong on that. Let's say I'm wrong on it. But if we're abiding to everyone's little emotions that they have, and not bending our knees to everything that they've been upset by, how can I expect them to make the very difficult decisions on whether they're going to go in or not? Because it's scary. Like, I can't face that. That's a huge fear of mine going inside there. Because like, when do we stop at some point and say, you're going to have to be able to be mentally tough for this? Now, I do understand mental health is something that it's a real thing, but when do we take it? When does it go too far?
Well, if you're scared of going into a fire, maybe not the job for you. Yeah.
There
are people out there that are scared that still work. That's the thing. I
think it's okay to be afraid of fire, because you should have a healthy respect for what you're putting on the line every time you go in. That being said, I think mental toughness is two things, right? It can be both. You can be keenly aware of what's going on with your body and mind every single time you're exposed to trauma, and also be mentally tough. And I would argue that in order to be mentally tough, you have to understand mental health. You have to understand that the body and the mind are connected. So if you have a healthy fear of fire, that's a good thing. Like, I don't see any problem with that. Because if you're not mentally fit, then you're not going to be able to go into the fire.
And I think this is the thing, like the young ones, like, I live by this with my kids: be scared, but do it anyways. Right. So like Chelsi was saying, you can be scared, but you have to be able to overcome that. And mental health training is going to teach you how. Right. So it's not babying them. I mean, I hate using that term. I think that's very antiquated thinking. We're not babying them, and we're not like capitulating to what, their needs, I guess. But we're bringing awareness to, yeah, okay, this is normal. Your reaction is normal. How do we overcome this? How do we get past this? That's what the mental health training is supposed to do, right? And if you can't get past it, okay, then maybe this is not the job for you, and we need to find you something else, right? So that's the mental health part of it, is teaching them to be aware of what they're scared of, how their body reacts, all of those things, so that they can either move on and still do the job, or say, okay, actually, I can't do this.
Well, and I think too, like, it's not so much sitting around and like letting them be babied, right? It's having open conversations about, okay, we just went to a really extremely tough call, guys. We're sitting around the dinner table now, or, sitting in our recliners watching the football game or whatever we're doing after this call. And it's having an open discussion about how it made us feel. It's not so much like saying, okay, that made me feel terrible, I'm not going to go back on another call in 5 minutes. It's that really was tough for me personally, and this is how I'm going to deal with it. And then getting back on the horse and going again. Like,
yep.
Right.
Yep.
So that's the mental health that I want to see, us being able to openly discuss our feelings at a dinner table and not have a bunch of pushback and sarcasm about it.
Yeah. Or people making us feel stupid about the way we feel. Yep.
Or not
100%.
being able to feel anything because that's not tough enough. And that you're not a firefighter if you don't feel. Like that's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Straight up.
Yep. That's how we'll end it. Okay.
Yeah, we can end it like that. I'm glad we cleared that up, because in the political climate today, when they say mental health, it's completely separate. And I've been involved in some of that stuff, and at that point it is babying to every considerable thing when kids in college are needing cry rooms. That's what a lot of guys see today when they hear mental health for the fire service. But
I want a cry room.
Right?
I don't want a cry room.
I want a nap room and a cry room. That's it.
That sounds
My cry room
amazing.
is
Oh my
wherever I'm at the time. That's my cry room. Ladies, thank you so much for coming on and insightfully educating me on a lot of the stuff that you guys do for your podcast. Again, where can you have your podcast be found at, and what's your Instagram handle name and all that stuff?
Well, thanks for having us, Matt. This was actually really fun. We don't usually do this. We like being the interviewer. So being the interviewee is always kind of interesting. But we're on Instagram at Dear Chiefs Podcast, and we have a website, dearchiefs.com. And we're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on all the things. You can just go directly to our website and listen to all of our podcasts and laugh at our reels and all of our funny stuff we do online.
Well, again, thank you both so much. Chelsi, you have anything to add?
Nope. I think she covered it.
So when I go to end this, just don't leave yet. But thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
There we have it. We're at the very end of the podcast. Thank you so much for sticking all the way around to the very end. I know that sometimes they can be very long and you don't have a whole lot of time in your really busy schedules, raising kids, having families, working all the time, having your own hobbies. But to me, it means a lot that you've stuck around all the way to the end. If I earned it and I deserve it, and you think I deserve it, go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple or anything else, if I deserved it and you think I earned it, please follow me or subscribe to that channel. Also, please follow Dear Chiefs Podcast on Instagram as well. Let them know what you thought of the episode, things that you've related with, and things that you think that you didn't understand before, but you do now. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I would like it as well. It is More with Stumpo Podcast. Again, thank you so much. It really does mean a lot to me, and I hope you have a blessed day.